Hello and welcome to the Monterey Peace and Justice Center in Seaside, California. I'm Catherine Crockett, Board President of Peace and Justice Center. We are a community-supported facility dedicated to education on peace, nonviolence, democracy, social justice, sustainability, and diversity. The center is one of many organizations that belong to the Peace Coalition of Monterey County, and many of the organizations use this as their home base. The views expressed at this event are not necessarily endorsed by the Peace and Justice Center, whose objective is to stimulate discussion and critical thinking on social political issues. The center is supported by volunteer efforts and donations. To learn more about our programs, you can subscribe to the weekly peace calendar on our website, peacecentral.wordpress.com. So we welcome John Lindsay-Poland today. He's a writer, activist, research analyst, and he co-directs the California Healing Justice Program of the American Friends Service Committee, focusing on human rights and police demilitarization. He co-authored the Care First, Jails Last policy, which is in the process of being adopted by the Alameda County law enforcement, and the intent is to decriminalize mental illness and build a robust community-based mental health infrastructure. John, thank you for joining us today. Thank you, and welcome back to the Monterey Peace and Justice Center.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Catherine. I don't know whether you all can hear me okay.
Yes.
Great. I'm sorry I'm not with you in person. I'm in Oakland, and McGregor said, "Well, you could do this virtually. We'll do it hybrid." So it saved me about 4 hours of driving.
Right.
I want to introduce myself and then also just hear a little bit about who's in the room as well and where you're from, where you live. As Catherine said, I co-direct the California Healing Justice Program of the American Friends Service Committee, which is an international organization seeking justice with peace in many different ways, in many different places. Our program seeks to create healing paths instead of punitive ones, and eventually to create a world where police and prisons don't exist. So that's where the Care First policy that Catherine comes in. It's also one reason why we focus a good deal on policing. Personally, I have spent several decades working on international issues, on U.S. policy and human rights and militarization in Latin America. So I brought a lot of those skill sets to the work on policing. So I do a lot of research as well as advocacy, which you'll see in this presentation. I'm not sure. Let's see. Okay, we'll go here. Oops, here we go. So now I think the mic is on here in the room in the Peace and Justice Center. So I want to just ask, because I don't know all of you, what your name is, if you have a preferred pronoun, and particularly the city and county where you live. Policing is a very local phenomenon on the whole. There are, of course, federal police agencies that are very important. But a lot of what we're going to talk about is city and county law enforcement agencies and communities. So if you would indulge me, maybe starting with the folks who are physically present, just say your name and where you live. If you want to share something else about why you're here today, that's okay too. But then we'll ask the folks who are online as well. So go for it.
Yeah, I am Sylvia Shi. I'm on the board of Monterey Peace and Justice Center. I live in Seaside, the city of Seaside. And I'm interested because I have been following the prison situation on and off. And currently we have a new sheriff. I saw her yesterday. She was present at the unveiling of the Martin Luther King Jr.'s statue in Marina. And so we have encountered her several times. And I think that it's time that we can move the needle. But she also needs support because whoever is there is very entrenched.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Sylvia. Behind you.
Oh, yes. Hi, I'm Sydney Ramsden Scott. And I actually live in Pebble Beach, which is an unincorporated area. So we have the sheriff. That's our law enforcement, sheriff of Monterey County. And yeah, I'm interested because I actually, in a little bit, I'll go and get my favorite quote from Joyce Vanderveer, who used to be very active, founder of this center. The Native American approach, before they had any jails, before they had any jury systems and courts. Anyway, so I've been interested for a long, long time, coming at it from that direction, the Native American approach.
Great. Thank you, Sydney.
I'm Lynn Hamilton, and I'm on the board of the Monterey Peace and Justice Center. My pronouns are she and her, and I've never said that before. Anyway, I live in Monterey, city of Monterey, in the county of Monterey, and I am soon going to be learning about our police force, our city police force has a new group, a multi, what do you call it, when community action team kind of group that goes out and helps with, and has a group to help people who are in trouble on the street and so on. So I'm going to be learning about that this week later, and I'm glad to hear that. That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Glenn.
I'm Judy Karras. I live in Monterey, and I'm also on the board of the Monterey Peace and Justice Center. And I heard you speak before when you came here and talked about guns going both ways to and from Mexico. And I'm a Quaker, and I support the American Friends Service Committee's work.
Great. Thank you so much, Judy. I think McGregor, and there might be someone else there.
My name is McGregor Eddie. I live in Salinas. Out of my work on this issue, I have been appointed by a progressive young city councilwoman in Salinas to the Police Advisory Commission. But I've only been to 2 meetings, and it's not, the commission is not used to speaking up. So it's going to take a while to meet people and develop a conversation. The thing that most strikes me is that the city of Salinas has had a tremendous reduction in gang violence, an extraordinary reduction. In the 90s, we held the record for youth homicide in the state of California. And that hasn't been true for a long time. It's gone way down. And I'm interested in the process that did that, because it involves the police as well. And that is a very good thing that has been happening. So I want to look at the directions that we're going that are helpful. For this particular issue, at this particular time, I couldn't get anybody that I know interested in it, because everyone is extremely engaged in the homeless situation, which does involve the police in the clearance. So no one was interested in AB 41. People were very interested in the relationships with the police and the homeless. So I think we just do some education and maybe approach it from a different direction, but we can talk about that. But
Yeah, and you got a few people in the room today, so don't dismiss that. All right.
I don't dismiss it. Oh,
Okay.
I'm in Salinas.
And so, there's someone else there too in the room?
Well, I've already introduced myself, but I'm Catherine again. Pronouns are she and her, and I live in the city of Seaside, and we have a compliant, more than compliant, I think a very good police force, and our police chief has been in the system as a youth offender, and he's making sure that we're not sharing the use of a MRAP vehicle that an adjacent community acquired. So he doesn't want to see that on the streets of Seaside. So we're lucky to have him for our police chief. And yes.
Okay, great. And then online, I know there's George and a couple people who's just appear to be dialing by phone. Can they be unmuted? Can you unmute?
Can I start?
For it.
Hi, it's Janet Wilson, and I live in Pacific Grove. My pronouns, if you choose to use one, could be one. I used to be active with the Peace Center. I more than I am now. And I'm a member of the Monterey Peninsula Friends Quaker meetings. And thanks for coming.
Great. Thank you so much, Janet.
I'm George. I live in Monterey. I'm an activist at the city and county level. In a prior life, I had a fair amount of experience around some of the criminal justice reforms following the Watts riots and other long hot summer things. But this was a number of years ago. But so my information is dated, but my interest continues.
Great, thanks, George. And then HT on the line.
Hi, I'm Heidi Trinkle. I'm with the Veterans for Peace, and yeah, my daughter for years, I'm in Pacific Grove right now, but I've got a background of being up in Portland, Oregon, and Portland's got a lot of issues with their police. And my daughter, when she was going to law school, she was one of the observers, the legal observers, and there was so much abuse and overuse of violence and just brutal tactics on such peaceful demonstrators, including the media and actually some of the legal observers got hurt. And so this is very timely. And as I'm heading back up to the Portland area, I'm kind of curious what's going on and what maybe other activists up in Portland would be able to do with this too.
Great. Thank you so much. Is there anybody who hasn't introduced themselves yet? I think maybe that's everyone. Well, thanks. So I want to talk about, I'm going to focus on the militarization of policing. I hear from all the different introducmilitarized that there's interest in a lot of different aspects of policing and criminal justice issues. And militarized policing is really only one aspect of those issues, and they're connected to each other. And I certainly recognize that a lot of what we focus on is reducing the scope of policing, because these days police are called in by civilians. Right, not typically not by their own initiative, but mandated by civilians. And when I say civilians, I mean non-law enforcement, community and elected officials, to address mental illness, to address homelessness, to address drug use, to address natural disasters, to address school discipline. There's so many social issues and social needs that have been assigned to police that, in our view, do not require and are counterproductive to assign to an agency that is trained in lethal force, is trained to use force. And that that scope of law enforcement's mission almost necessarily leads to violence of one sort or another, because we are assigning agencies that are mandated, they're trained, their kind of whole approach of being is around law enforcement and using force in order to enforce the law. So a lot of what we're seeking is to reduce the scope of policing by creating and channeling resources to other ways to meet those needs, and therefore reducing resources for police. I think, at least while I'm speaking, if we can mute the in-room piece of the Zoom, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. So we do that in various different ways. We support state legislation. We are part of a network. I think it was Sydney who mentioned the sort of indigenous approach of restorative justice. And we are seeking ways to create greater capacity as well as legal support for restorative approaches to transgression and conflict around the state, particularly in our county, but statewide as well. And we also are seeking to close prisons statewide as a way of, and seeking to create other ways to, again, to address ways that people are in conflict or in violence, in community violence. So again, today I'm going to focus mostly on police militarization and a particular law that was approved by the state legislature and signed by the governor in the wake of the 2020 protests against the killing of George Floyd and many others by police. And this law, known as AB 481, and I'll refer to it that way, creates a process. It recognizes police militarization and its negative impacts, but it doesn't directly demilitarize police. What it does, or any law enforcement agency, including sheriffs, what it does is it requires every law enforcement agency in the state to, and that includes city police forces, county sheriffs, prison police, park police, transit police, California Highway Patrol, to first disclose what militarized equipment they have and create proposed policies for their use. So it is a transparency and accountability law. Those policies are submitted to local elected officials. In the case of cities, to city councils; in the case of counties, to county supervisors. With other agencies, it's a little bit more complicated who their governing body is. And then those governing bodies, those elected officials, review them, and with community input, in community hearings, approve those policies, or they can say, no, we don't like this, and send it back to the law enforcement agency. This is an annual process. So it went into effect in 2021, and every law enforcement agency was required to submit these policies in 2021 and then get them approved. And then every year, the law enforcement agency submits an annual report on how that equipment was used. And that report is posted on the agency's website. It's submitted to the elected body, to the governing body, and there's a reapproval process that's annual. And it's not, depending on the jurisdiction, it's at different times. There's not one calendar time when it's going to happen. So within Monterey County, that's happening at all different times in different jurisdictions, and that's true across the state. But it's an important piece because it opens up decision-making about where is the line between what is okay to use and particularly when is it okay to use it? In what situations is it okay to deploy an armored vehicle or tear gas or an assault rifle or battering rams for opening up a house or any of the types of equipment that are on this list, which I'll go into in a moment. And so on the left here, this is in Hayward, where a community group mobilized in order to basically hold elected officials accountable. So again, it's elected officials who are making these decisions. A lot of times in these conversations, people focus on the conversation with police, but here it's probably even more central, the conversation with elected officials, that elected officials no longer delegate entirely the judgment about where is that line between what is okay in terms of militarized policing and what is not okay with the community. So one of the reasons why this is so important, and this is recognized in the preface to the law, is that law enforcement across the country, this is not peculiar to California, it's not peculiar to Monterey County or where I live in Oakland, is applied unequally in Black and brown communities and against Black and brown neighborhoods and households and individuals than it is to white and other ethnicities. And so when you have militarized gear or militarized methods of policing, that is also going to have a disproportional impact. These are force multipliers in the language of the military, right? So that means that any force that is used by law enforcement, legitimate or illegitimate, is going to be multiplied if there is already a disparate application of law enforcement across our communities by race or by any other thing. For example, against disabled people, or against young people, or against non-English speaking people. If there is a disparity in that law enforcement, then it is highly likely to show up in the application of militarized equipment as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the types of equipment that AB 481 covers. It includes some things, this might not be familiar to you. This is a surveillance tool, like a piece of equipment. And in these conversations, often everything is called a tool, whether it's a lethal weapon or something else. And this particular one, it is a camera that in Long Beach that the police department had actually already for several years, but because of a non-disclosure agreement with the supplier of the camera, they had never disclosed that they had it. It's something that rides around like you can see in the back of a truck. Sometimes it was brought to protests, and it's essentially surveilling. And so the law made it clear, made it visible that this camera was being used, but also required a use policy. Okay, is it okay to surveil protests, or when is it okay to surveil and when is it not okay to surveil? And so that's one step forward this common with this law. Here's something else that's a bit more intense. It's called a rook, which is, it's a combination of an armored vehicle and kind of a destroyer. So in the picture on the left, you can see SWAT team members who are making an entry into the second floor of a building, of a residence. And they're doing this presumably because there's someone armed inside, or they believe the person is armed and they're serving a warrant, or they're going after them because the person has fled there. And you can also see in the picture on the right that when they are being lifted to, or they are in the vehicle, they're in a protected zone that they can also point their weapons out of. so they can shoot out of this a particular armored structure. And the Sacramento Police Department got federal funding to purchase one of these. I think it cost about $400,000. And again, this created a process for a community decision about it. It's been very difficult in Sacramento, even with a mobilized community, to get real transparency and an open process about these decisions. But the community is very much engaged in it. Here's an example of something where AB 481 definitely changed the outcome. So in San Francisco, like many communities, many police departments and sheriff's offices are investing in drones and robots. It's an automation of law enforcement in many respects. And, a lot of people say that's great because they can do explosives removal. If there's a suspected explosive in some location, a robot could go in and detect it, dispose of it perhaps. And that's why San Francisco Police Department had obtained robots, in this case, very similar to many law enforcement agencies. And during the course of the review of militarized equipment that the department has, one of the county supervisors asked, would this robot be used to exert force on a person, to use violence against a person? And the department said, well, actually, yes, in unusual circumstances, of course. Even though the robot was not designed to do so, they could rig it in a situation if they thought that, there was a shooter or someone else. The extreme situation was not super well defined, but they said, yes, we would use it to deliver a bomb. And this created quite a controversy. There was suddenly media, international media even, about these killer robots in San Francisco, which people see as very liberal. And the supervisors, after a lot of community mobilization, protests, and lots of media attention, reversed itself and said these robots will not be used to deliver lethal force. They still might be used to deliver some kind of force like pepper spray, but they reversed that particular use of these robots. Okay, so now I'm going to zero in a little bit on Monterey County, and we can come back to this. I'm going to talk about some other examples after this, but I wanted to give you a sense of some of what we've learned from AB 481, at least in the county. And this is, each of these policies are typically, when you include the inventories, they're between 12 and 40 pages long for each type of equipment, because the use policies include information about the equipment, the cost, the quantity, a product description, as well as the authorized uses and purpose, the training required, the legal processes for use, any kind of legal procedures that the department has to go through. So this is, drawing from these voluminous different documents. And you'll see that Monterey County, this is the sheriff's office, right, has 105 assault weapons. Can you all see this okay? Is this visible to everybody? Someone nod to let me know it's visible to you. Yeah, okay, great. And you'll see that there are quite a few drones. I would imagine this number will grow in the coming years. Also a number of robots. And the most equipment that is owned by these agencies is assault rifles. There are also launchers. So these are launchers that would be used to shoot or deliver chemical agents like tear gas or impact projectiles like rubber bullets, also known as rubber bullets. And so this kind of just gives you a sense of what's listed. Now, in the case of the sheriff, the particular policy of the sheriff is not very good. So one of the problems with it is it doesn't list the number, the quantity of equipment. These figures that I'm giving you here are because we submitted Public Records Act requests to hundreds of agencies. And so we have receipts from the Monterey County Sheriff's Office that show that they have 105 assault weapons and these other types of equipment. But there isn't, in addition, Monterey County, although the policy was approved on consent by the Board of Supervisors in June of last year, there is no annual report posted on the sheriff's website yet. So the sheriff is not in compliance with the law, at least in those respects. There's much more that we could talk about that. In the case of Monterey City, because I know George and Judy are from, and Glenn are from Monterey, the Monterey PD ordinance was approved in May of last year. There is no annual report yet. And you can see the number of assault weapons and launchers and so on that the city police have. In the case of Pacific Grove, the policy was submitted in February of last year. There's still no annual report posted. In the case of Delray Oaks, one of the issues in that policy, which is very common actually, is that the chemical agents that are listed, the policy actually violates state law on use of force, because there's another fairly new, really implemented at the same time as AB 41, state law called AB 48, which severely limits the use of chemical agents for crowd control. And it really requires a number of steps and restricts the circumstances in which any kind of chemical agent could be used in crowd control. And yet the Delray Oaks PD policy says it could be used for crowd control. It's very vague and actually contradicts the state law. So we can come back to that. Now, I want to do a little exercise, which is to help you think about what you would do if you wanted to find these documents. So I think a couple of you are from Seaside. We could look for the documents in Seaside, or is there another community in Monterey County that anyone would particularly like to do this sort of trial run with?
Or just
Go with Seaside,
Yeah,
since it wasn't listed.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to share my screen again, and you're going to see my my desktop, which has many things on it, as you will see. Okay, so we're going to do a search for Seaside Police Department, and look on the agency's website, which I was on earlier today. And we're going to look for, because the AB 41 policy is supposed to be prominent on the site, let's see where it is. This is the police. Okay, and here we go. Now here is in February, the annual report was presented to the community. So that's an announcement of that event back in February. And let's see what else is here. I'm not exactly seeing anything. So let's look at the site map. And we'll look down at the police department. Planning department. Police
It was
department.
actually on that page, John. It was on the right side. It was a link at the right, close to the top side
Okay, all right.
page.
Oops. Let me okay. We saw it on the right. Okay, here we go. There we go. Okay, so this is going to be often what you will see if you look for your departments. And what we see here is a policy that was actually created by, the template was created by a private company called Lexipol. Lexipol is like I said, a private company that sells policies to law enforcement agencies across California and the country. And so they create a template that many law enforcement agencies have used. And what you will see in these is these are kind of designed to be incorporated into the agency's overall policy manual. And the first few pages are almost always text from the law of AB 481. So it's, a lot of this language is going to be the same language as you will see in the law. You'll see that the department creates a military equipment coordinator. So there's somebody in the agency that is tasked to deal with this issue and compliance with this law. And then there's going to be an inventory. And then there's an approval process. This is straight from AB 481. Then there is something about coordination with other jurisdictions, which is important in Monterey County because there's so much of the county that is unincorporated, but also many of the communities have very small departments and don't have a lot of equipment. And so what the agencies have done is they've created this Monterey Peninsula Regional Special Response Unit, which is essentially, it incorporates a SWAT team. It probably includes some other functions in it, like negotiation team as well. But a lot of the SWAT will live kind of within this. And so it's regional, which means that the agencies, there's not entirely complete community autonomy in the decision-making about these things. It's complicated, right? Because if you have an inter-community function or agency that is militarized, how does any particular community exercise its own decision-making power when it's in that regional function? But that's, and basically what it says is military equipment owned by other jurisdictions that may be used inside Seaside. Seaside PD is authorized to use that military equipment in connection with the special response unit's activities. So it's essentially saying, okay, if the county sheriff has a particular policy, and here we go, this is actually the more important part. Military equipment used by other jurisdictions providing aid to Seaside PD shall comply with their respective military equipment use policies. In other words, if the sheriff comes into Seaside, the sheriff's policies for military equipment are going to prevail, not necessarily Seaside's. And that's an important piece here. Then there's the thing about annual report, community engagement. Again, these are aspects of the law, probably not much novel, although the department does say that they will hold 2 public meetings. There's only 1 required by the law for transparency and public engagement. It might reflect what you were talking about, Catherine. Now, let's look at the inventory itself. And again, we're going to see a drone. And here is the one of the key pieces of any policy, which is purpose and authorized uses. And what this says is vehicles, this is drones, are capable of being remotely piloted to provide scene information and intelligence in the form of video and still images transmitted to first responders. This does not define authorized uses. It only defines what this piece of equipment is capable of. So, in other words, we don't really know whether the drone could be used without a warrant. We don't know with or without a warrant whether it could be used inside people's homes. We don't really know how long any of the footage, the camera footage, would be retained. Like there's no real use policy here. So that's something that might be a good thing to question. Here is the 30 assault rifles, or 30 of the assault rifles. This is particular, it has to have policy for each type, right? Again, this is to address the purpose and authorized uses here is to address short to long distance threats. I don't really know what that means. What is a threat? It's not defined. So, I mean, that could be someone who we don't really know what that means. We can assume, we can say what we think it means, what the department maybe has said verbally that it means, but this is what the policy says. There is also here a reference to the department policy manual. Policy 312 is for firearms. I did look this up before our event today. And for patrol rifles, which is what this is, again, these are assault rifles. These are, like AR-15 type rifles. It lists a number of situations and says could be used, including but not limited to the following situations. So again, there's no kind of restriction on when it would be used. Same thing again with this other type of assault rifle. Again, this is another type of assault rifle. This is the ammo for it, which is also governed by, this is the less lethal shotgun. So this is like rubber bullets. And again, there is some type of department policy for these, which I have not looked at. Then there is going to be the munition used in those launchers, projectile munitions again, more less lethals that fire these things. And again, these munitions that are less lethals, like rubber bullets, are governed by this new law, AB 48, in terms of crowd control. So here, this says to compel an individual to cease his or her actions. They're not saying it's for crowd control, which is a good sign that they're not saying, yes, we would do it for crowd control. These are pain compliance weapons. And then they've got here things that they use, like armored vehicles. They don't have one. They use one by a collaborating law enforcement agency, which has its own SWAT team. I'm going to stop there and give you a sense of that's just, if you wanted to look at your own agency, that is one way that you could do it. And now I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint here. And I'll just give a couple more examples of some things that we've done, and well, really communities around the state have done. So the first one is related to Santa Cruz, and in Santa Cruz, the police department did not include assault rifles in their policy because there is a loophole in AB 41 that says if the assault rifles are standard issue service weapons, then they are not covered by the law. And so Santa Cruz PD said our AR-15s are standard issue service weapons, even for bike cops, even for others. And so we're going to keep them out of the policy. And so what a lot of the community members, including ACLU members in Santa Cruz, mobilized and spoke out at the city council, and the city council decided to add them anyway, because there is also a part of AB 41 that says the governing body can add other things to its list of militarized equipment that require a use policy and require transparency and reporting on their use. And so that has happened in Santa Cruz as well as in Emeryville. I wanted to just mention, I think there are copies, at least for the in-person meeting there, of this report that we did last year, which you can also find on our website, which is called Equipped for War. This was based on several hundred Public Records Act requests to law enforcement agencies around the state, in which we asked for purchase records, records of use, some use policies as well. We started with the equipment that's coming from the Pentagon. And something I neglected to mention is that this law covers equipment regardless of how the agency obtained it. So a lot of agencies are like kind of object to the phrase military equipment because they say we don't get anything from the Pentagon. And this law covers things that agencies are buying. And one of the things that we found in our research is that most of this stuff is being purchased, particularly the smaller things like individual weapons. Armored vehicles, a lot of times, are obtained through a grant, either an equipment grant from the Pentagon with leftover war material, or with a cash grant from the Department of Homeland Security to purchase armored vehicles. And most law enforcement agencies of any size around the state have now obtained armored vehicles that a lot of community members, it looks to them like tanks. So we sort of documented that and looked at the ways in which communities could use AB 41. And I want to say, before I go into one other piece here, and then we can open it up, is we've created these toolkits that are on our website at afsc.org/AB481 that that anybody can use in any community around California to help implement AB 481 in your community, to see how, they're very technical documents sometimes, and law enforcement uses its own vocabulary in many cases. And so a lot of the purpose of the toolkit is to help people in different communities understand what these pieces of equipment are, what AB 481 does, what use policies are, how to use AB 481, how, possible talking points or questions that can be raised at the public meetings that AB 481 requires, including when the use policies come up, but also when these annual reports occur and there are community meetings or meetings of the governing body to make decisions about these policies. So want to encourage you to use those resources as much as you're able to. Now, there's a particular area of this that we've been researching more in the last few months, which is particularly disturbing, and it has to do with the use of militarized equipment in state prisons and county jails. And when we got data from the state prison agency known as CDCR on their acquisitions and use of militarized equipment, we found that CDCR in the different 36 state prisons is using militarized equipment by far more than any other agency. I mean, hundreds of times a year. And so that was kind of disturbing. We also learned that they're purchasing a lot more chemical agents, less lethal launchers and munitions, as well as even assault rifles, at a much higher quantity than other agencies. So we're looking at, why is that? How is this stuff being used? There are reports that are published by the CDCR on the use of these weapons. And there's a particular weapon that I'll talk about in a little bit, which are called scattershot, and which I'll explain, which CDCR has many of. And so the closest one to you all in Monterey County would be Soledad, right? And technically known as Salinas Valley State Prison. These are what we found of the ways that uses of force, which are, uses of violence by personnel, not these are not measuring uses of force by prisoners within prisons. So in state prisons by month, since basically in the last 2+ years. And you'll see that the brown bars here are the use of OC, which is pepper spray. The blue bars are physical force, so body force essentially. The green bars are impact projectiles, so they're not used as much as other things, but they are used, about 100 times a month. Close to 100 times a month. This is statewide in the different state prisons. And you'll see there is a kind of a growth here that is kind of disturbing. And we don't really know why it's grown in the last couple of years, but it's something that we're investigating more. Now, this is a measurement of all of those uses of force. The percentage that were used against people classified as mental health inmates. So these are prisoners who have a mental health diagnosis. And you will see that it's a majority. It's about 75%, and that has grown a little somewhat too. In the case of Soledad, the number of uses in Soledad, there's about 12 uses of force per month. I'm sorry, of uses of less lethal launchers per month. And 86 of the uses of force are against mental health inmates. So I don't know if any of you have any contact with people who are inside Soledad, or people who work inside Soledad, or volunteer, or do any kind of advocacy for prisoners. But this is something that we find very disturbing, and we want to support work on. So we're also particularly focusing on one type of less lethal weapon, so-called less lethal weapon, which is something we call scattershot, which is, these are things that fire projectiles that are, again, these are pain compliance weapons, but when they leave the barrel of the launcher, they disperse. And there's also these grenade type weapons that disperse in 3D, right, in many different directions. And because they disperse, they are by nature indiscriminate. And so if you're firing up close, there are issues of all of the issues of close range fire of these things, but in particular, you cannot target a part of the body. That state law requires that when these weapons are used, that the head, the neck, and the groin not be targeted. But when you have an indiscriminate weapon like this, there's no way of targeting it. And if you do it from a distance, there's no way of targeting a particular individual. So much less targeting a part of the body. So, and they are used in state prisons and jails. I do not know whether in Monterey County, the county sheriff, well, actually, I know that the county sheriff doesn't have these types of weapons. We do not know what type of policy they have for use of less lethals inside the jails, any type of less lethal. And this is just from Alameda County, a testimony. I interviewed someone who had been in the jail for over a year. And he talked about seeing these munitions be used in cell extractions. And it's important to note that it's not just the weapon, right? There's a lot of times when these operations happen, they might be a cell extraction, or they might be someone who has a mental illness and doesn't want to go back into the cell, or they don't want to go for treatment. In the case of Santa Clara County, for example. And so there's an operation where there's a group of officers who are clad in full black gear, face shields, tactical vests, extra grenades, and everything. And you don't know who they are. You don't know whether these are guards that you have seen on a daily basis, or somebody who's been brought in from outside. So in this case, there was a prisoner who had severe mental illness, probably didn't understand exactly what was going on. He had become assaultive, and they used this on him, and he, sometimes they set it off in a small cell. So I want to mention one other thing that we're doing. McGregor asked me to mention this as well because of a particular local connection here. There are, as I said, some loopholes in AB 41. One is the loophole around assault rifles that I mentioned for standard issue service weapons. Another is that the community engagement meeting does not have to occur before the governing body renews its approval of the weapons. And there have been many places where the community engagement meeting occurs after the governing body has actually made its decision. So this would require that the community engagement meeting occur before the elected officials make their decision about it, so that you get the benefit of the community input. And it would also require, it has a better definition of authorized uses, which is the display, deployment, or discharge, authorized display, deployment, or discharge of the weapon. So you wouldn't be able to do the type of authorized use, very vague, that I showed you before in the seaside policy. I think maybe I should pause because I've gone for quite some time. We do have some things that we want to encourage people to do. A lot of it is about what you can do next, in terms of just looking at seeing what's in your community, what alternatives there are, how are people already responding to things, how can your this was designed for Quakers, but how can your group support each other in learning things? We have a pledge that is to think twice before calling the police. In other words, to think through why you're calling the police, whether it's necessary to do so, whether there's any kind of alternative. And then work with people in your community. That's a lot of what we focus on. What skills do you need in order to respond to the needs in your community without calling law enforcement? What skills do you need personally, as well as what are needed collectively? How can those be built up? What are the agencies' needs, whether they're mental health agencies or housing agencies that need funding in order to create the resources so that law enforcement is not assigned these things, and how to work with others. So I think I'm going to stop there. I do want to say we have a conversation happening this coming Wednesday. It's a statewide conversation where you would, if you join us, you could hear more about it. I believe there is, you can, if you're online, you can put your email in the address. I'll send you information about it. Or if you're in the room, you can sign the sign-up sheet, and we can also send you information that way. So, like I said, I've talked quite a while, and I hope I haven't put anybody to sleep, but would be very welcome to have any kind of conversation, any kind of responses, things that bugged you, things that you want to know, ideas you have. Go for it.
Thank you, John. It's all very interesting, all of it, and informative. One thing that bothered me was on when you had the graph of the local police departments there. Delray Oaks didn't list an armored vehicle, and they are notoriously, associated with that, since they are one of our smallest communities, and they have cooperative agreements with Seaside and I assume others for emergency response. But I'm just curious if that was not on their report, or if it was just
Well, we should take a closer look. If they don't possess the vehicle, by the law, they should still create a policy for its use. If they're going to ask a neighboring agency to use any of this equipment, then they should still have a policy that governs that use when the neighboring agency comes in with it. But I don't know if I want to, go into the document right now, but we can take a look afterwards and follow.
thank you. Sorry, just talk over.
Sylvia?
Yes, in a document, in a report, they have to say what the weapon is going to be used for, the purpose. And one thing I learned from you is you pointed out that the language itself is very vague. It's used for long distance, short distance, you don't know what it is. So one thing we can do is ask those to be spelled out. However, there is the comeback could be that there are so many different situations and details, I couldn't possibly spell everything out. So there must be some key things we need them to spell it out, and like crowd control. What is it? Where is it used for? And do we need to ask them to spell out the distance? They probably say we couldn't. So we need to learn from your workshop as to what are the key things we really need to see them spell them out.
Yes, definitely. Very, very astute, Sylvia. There's the two things, right? There's the use policy, which guides the department, right? That's the document that should help officers make decisions about when to deploy these weapons. And if it doesn't really give any guidance, then it's about it's all up to the department. And maybe it says, a commander will decide when that's the case, or maybe it's the discretion of the individual officer. It's true. I have heard a number of departments say there are too many situations for us to define. But for example, I think I named that it said a short or long distance threat. The distance might be one factor, but I think another factor is, what is the nature of the threat? Is it a life-threatening situation? Or is it someone who is assaulting someone, or, not in a manner that appears to be life-threatening? Or is it a warrant that is being served for someone, an arrest warrant, where there's no knowledge of firearms use or firearms present? Or is it an active shooter situation? Like, these are very different types of situations. There are ways of defining the nature of the threat that don't say every single situation. So I think what I saw in the Seaside firearms policy is very common, which is for a patrol rifle, it says, the officer can deploy this when he has a reasonable expectation that it will be needed, such as but not limited to the following. So it gives examples, but it doesn't limit to those examples. When you've all heard about these situations where something goes really wrong and an officer kills someone, and the family or the community believes that it was wrong, that it was that it was a violation of rights. And then there's a process to review what happened. And that process might be internal to the department, or it might be a judicial process. But what is key in that review is the policy. And often you will hear in the internal review or in a DA review, this was not a violation of policy. And that's one reason why the policies are important, right? If they are vague, then if something goes really wrong, then there's going to be no accountability.
Oh, do you know of any policies that is clear in the use section that you can show as an example for other people to see?
Yeah, we do. We worked with the Oakland Police Department and Oakland City Council and Oakland Police Commission for policies on assault rifles, on the less lethals, and on armored vehicles that, you know, we're an abolitionist organization, so we're not going to say, oh yeah, you know, you should like approve assault rifles. We kind of hesitated before saying we can create a model policy for assault rifles. We're a pacifist organization, but these policies are much more clear and provide a basis for much more accountability than other policies. And I'd be glad to share them with you all.
Okay, thanks.
Well, that reminds me of what you just said reminds me of the saying that I thought of and have thought of often when dealing with this, that when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, because it's kind of, it seems like this country's policing is just a microcosm of what we do around the planet.
Yeah. I wanted to ask Heidi something. Heidi, are you there? Do you know of Portland? Because Oregon is different. Portland, though, is a pretty progressive city. I wonder if there's any regulations on military equipment in Portland. Just interesting, because this is a California law. Have other states passed similar laws?
No. There are some cities and states that have passed restrictions on the Pentagon supplied equipment. And in fact, there was last year, the Biden administration issued a federal directive that, so if a police department or any law enforcement agency is going to get gear like this stuff, like armored vehicles or weapons from the Pentagon as surplus equipment, they have to go through a similar process now, where that has to go through an approval process by the governing body with community input. But for other types of equipment that are acquired, or for other equipment that's acquired in other ways, there's I don't know of any other state law like this.
I've been attempting to deal with the Monterey Sheriff's Department. I started in April, the first part of April, and because I knew that they were supposed to schedule at some point the community meeting, which was run by the law enforcement agency, in this case, the sheriff's office. And so I started talking to the new sheriff's administrative officer, whose name is Jane Serbeck. And at first, I mean, in April, she was a little prickly, and but I just kept, saying, well, I kind of need to know, because the Peace Coalition wants to know, and the Monterey Peace and Justice Center wants to know, when that is. And she said, well, it is going to be sometime, we think, the first part of May. And I said, oh, good, I'll still be here, because I was going to leave in the middle of May and be gone for half a month. And I called periodically to say, has it been scheduled yet? And I called Mary, who is Mary, I'm blocking on Mary's name, Art.
Adams?
And Adams, Mary Adams, our board of supervisors. My board of supervisor person, and try to get a time that it was scheduled for them then to have a meeting in response to the first meeting. And it didn't happen to me. So anyway, when I got back in June, I started talking again to Jane. Now I decided that it was going to be, I was going to go in real gentle, and I was going to be, very friendly and so on. And that's worked. And Jane and I have established a pretty, I would say, nice relationship, phone relationship. But it's no longer in her hands, according to her. It's gone to the enforcement officer. His name is Jeff Hoyne, and she's given me his number and his email, and I contacted him on both. And what's interesting is that he keeps not being there. The time that he is on vacation, that and it's extended out to this point until Friday. He was supposed to be back on Friday the 8th. Is that yesterday? Day before? Yeah, day before yesterday.
Mhm.
And as far as I know, he still isn't. But my thing is that I want to stay in good. I want to do this. I want to do it collaboratively. I don't want to push them in a way that it's aggressive, so aggressive that they feel alienated by us. I want to say, we just like to see the sheriff's office, because we like Tina. All of us, we were really supportive of her, that our new sheriff. We want to see her succeed, and we want to see the sheriff's office being compliant with 481. And so, do you have any tips about how I can maintain this friendship that I feel like?
Well,
Yeah.
I think you've taken a lot of the steps. I mean, that's great what you've done. The relationship with Supervisor Adams, is that her name?
Gary Adam.
Is key. I think that's because she might be saying it's out of her hands, right? But I think that's kind of a cop-out, actually, because it shouldn't be up to one individual citizen to keep the law enforcement agency on track for complying with AB 481. And the supervisors have, the sheriff is an elected official, and a lot of supervisors say, oh, we can't do very much, but they have leverage. They have certainly more leverage than individuals like us do. And typically the sheriff will come before the supervisors regularly, right? Or at least the sheriff's representative about something. So a supervisor can write a letter, can make a phone call, can ask a question when there's something coming up before them, and say, when can we expect this? I understand, that the enforcement officer has been working on it, and understand that this is an annual process, and this was approved in June of last year, so it's been more than 12 months. What's the calendar for this? And persistent, but nice, but persistent.
Yeah.
I don't know if that helps. I mean, I think
it helps, but Mary Adams she's retiring, and so we're going to have in this next election to do just like at this point it's still just going to be the primary. Anyway, Alan and
well,
yeah.
but if she's a lame duck, use it. She's got nothing to lose, right? I mean, I don't know if she wants higher office, but
no, thanks. That's great. That's great. Thank you. It's perfect. Yeah.
I mean, if you think if this, what's the name of the enforcement officer, Jeff what?
Hoyne. H-O-Y. Hoyne.
So if Officer Hoyne says, oh no, we're all good, we're compliant, blah blah blah. I mean, if you want some points on ways in which the policy is not compliant, there, it's the first year, so some people might be given a little, leeway, but there, I'm sure, are things we can point out that say, well, okay, this doesn't really define the authorized use, or you don't really have any independent oversight named in the policy, or, you don't give the quantities of each type, which is true for the sheriff's policy. There's no quantities given. So we can work with you on that if that seems like it would be a useful next step.
Actually, we have 5 county supervisors. I think that, we fail you. We can call other supervisors. We will try that.
Are there other supervisors who you think might be sympathetic?
Say it again. We have 4th district. We have Wendy. I can talk to her.
You think she might be sympathetic?
Yes, sympathetic. Yes. Yes.
Quite progressive.
Very much for the people. We elected her. She better be.
Well, I'll talk to Luis Alejo. He certainly is in favor of following state law, which is a pretty low bar for sheriff conduct, I would think. So I'll talk to Mr. Alejo. He's my supervisor.
Great.
We'll start this.
I will talk to Wendy.
Okay.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. That's so important.
We're such wild radicals. We're saying, please obey the law.
Yeah. I don't know if Glenn or Judy or George wanted to say anything. Ask anything.
If it's
Or
Lynn.
Janet.
I'm
Janet
sorry. No, Judy or Janet or George.
And Lynn.
You all are muted. I don't know.
I
You
wonder.
need to unmute them, I think. Didn't we mute them for the noise?
They can unmute themselves.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Great.
I have one
So-
question.
Yeah, go for it.
You said earlier you filed public record request. Was that recourse to the non-compliance of, for the annual report? Was that your action to try to, push that along, or what was that in reference to?
So we use the Public Records Act, but we don't really like it as a substitute for what the agency should be posting on its own site. We did a lot of these Public Records Act requests before the law came into effect, as it was about to come into effect, in order to understand better, what is the scope of militarized equipment that law enforcement has, and how much is it costing, and so we still use it sometimes when with a particular agency, if there's something that if there's something that is not, there's not a non-compliance, but really, with a Public Records Act request, I ask for it, it's given to me. It's not made public by the agency. And the purpose of AB 41, or one of its purposes, is to make these things public. So that includes, what they have, how much it costs, how they are authorized to use it, how they've used it over the past year, all of those things. And the PRA wouldn't really do that.
Okay, thank you.
AB 481 also is relevant to the sheriff's department, to the police department, right? So the fact that they are using the scatter bomb or projectile onto the prisoner, those situations has to come out.
Yeah, I mean, that's the chemical agents or projectiles that the sheriff has. I mean, we can look more closely in their policy manual to see what kind of policy they have for those. Because sometimes the AB 41 policy will reference the policy manual. And there can be an issue with that because the AB 41 policy comes before the public and is approved by a governing body. The policy manual typically is changed by the agency as they see fit. So if the public document that is approved by the public refers to something that is changed by the agency. The agency can change it, change how they use these things or when they use them, and that won't have a public process necessarily. So, but it's very technical, very, one has to dig deep. And you also have to figure out what are the most important things for transparency, for accountability, for community health, right? I mean, we can get very technical about it, but from my perspective, one of the most important things is that the law enforcement agency and the governing body, the elected officials, recognize that this means that non-law enforcement have a say, have a decisive say. And again, where is that line when militarized equipment should be acquired and when it can be used? And that recognition, I think, is key. A lot of elected officials don't want that responsibility. They don't want that authority. They would just as soon say, law enforcement, you'll take it. We love you. You put your lives on the line every day. We defer to you. We don't really want any authority on this. And so getting elected officials to step up and say, oh yeah, this is what would serve our community. This is what I'm hearing from the community. How can we meet the purposes of law enforcement and meet the needs of the community, what the community is saying? And that means also that we have to step up as community members. There's not a large number of people in this meeting, but we all know people, and a lot of times a small number of people can make a real difference.
Speaking of people we know, would you like to say anything about our local Ana Caballero?
Right, I neglected to mention that before. So AB 486, AB 1486 is a law that would close these loopholes in AB 481. It has been approved by the Assembly. It was approved by the Senate Public Safety Committee. It does not yet have sufficient votes to pass the floor of the Senate. 21 are needed, and we have 18 assured. Ana Caballero is one of those 18, but it's, feared that her district is rather tough. So we're trying to reinforce her commitment to it and possibly even encourage her to help bring on other, other senators who may be on the fence. Democratic senators, right? These are state senators, right? So I understand that some of you know Ana Caballero.
Yes.
And so communicating with her about the importance of this puts it on her radar. And, again, encouraging her to speak with her colleagues in support of it would be very helpful. This is down to the wire. I'm sorry?
What's the name of the bill? What number?
The AB 1486.
Oh, okay.
I got a whole paper about it.
Okay, all right. I have it.
Thank you, Senator.
Great, thank you.
Organization. I was just showing them a paper they have. Is it going to go to the Senate next week or might be pulled? We'll support her either way. What I like about it is, since I'm so infamously impolite, we can be very positive. We can send her, thank you for all your good work on this. Thank you for your support. We're starting to explore with our new sheriff and this demilitarized, just we can say nice things. What is layered? Does any of our people?
I will too.
You vote for it?
Yeah, I wrote that when you requested it, John. In
Great.
your letter.
Great.
Because he's my senator. And shall I do it for Anna also, even though she's not my senator? Should I call her? Concur?
All right, I'll ask Bill Monty. He keeps saying he's retired, but he has a lot of influence with local, so I'll see. So
Great.
we'll try.
Yeah, he would be.
We'll try out.
he could be great.
We know people who knew people back when.
So I don't know if there's any other comments or questions. If you've been very engaged, I really appreciate y'all.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
to.
George, you will work
I-
on so hard, don't
We
you?
wanna, yeah, we want me to kind of wind up? Okay.
Yeah, can we make sure that everybody has signed in so that we can reach back to folks and follow up, and we want to make sure, make sure we can still share information with you about this.
For Heidi and George and our guest on the phone,
Jay,
put
Jay.
Wes White.
No,
Jay.
Jan Wilson. That's
Oh,
right.
Jen, sorry.
We all have emails. I think it's somehow.
I think we know everyone who's here. We have everybody's email.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure you already know this quote from John Lodeer, who or Lane Deer, I'm sorry. He was a Sioux Indian who died in 1976, but this was in the peace calendar shortly after he died. So, and this is what he said: before our white brothers arrived to make a civilized man, we didn't have any kind of prison. Because of this, we had no delinquents. Without a prison, there can be no delinquents. We had no locks nor keys, and therefore among us there were no thieves. When someone was so poor that he couldn't afford a horse, a tent, or a blanket, he would, in that case, receive it all as a gift. We were too uncivilized to give great importance to private property. We didn't know any kind of money, and consequently, the value of the human being was not determined by his wealth. We had no written laws laid down, no lawyers, no politicians. Therefore, we were not able to cheat and swindle one another. We were really in bad shape before the white men arrived. And I don't know how to explain how we were able to manage without these fundamental things that, so they tell us, are so necessary for a civilized society.
John, I think we're come to the end of our discussion.
Get in the camera.
What?
You want to get in the camera?
Wait, I didn't know what you meant.
Yeah.
I'm willing to do things. I just need to. Hi, my name is McGregor Eddie. We're going to be following. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please. You're great, perfect. Just be in camera so we can see this.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is a small but important meeting. I think the discussion has great depth, and I think it builds on efforts that people are already making. The participation we've had in our county sheriff campaign, the upcoming, our involvement with the Criminal Justice Committee of the League of Women Voters. There's a lot of deep discussion going on countywide, and we are a part of it, and we hope it will deepen. And we are going to use this recording. So if there's anything you said you want us to edit out, tell now, but I've tried to remember it was being recorded and be careful. So I think that it is okay to show to people, and it won't outdate for a little bit for who missed this. So I want to tell you, thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Catherine, for all your work.
Thank you for organizing this.
So good night and peace be to you all.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody. And thanks, Sydney, for reading that quote again. I always love that.